Yo, call me Potential Man, I'm feeling kind of cramped. Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome back to the Game Skates. Today, and only today, we are here to talk about potential, right? That's right, a word that gets thrown around a lot when it comes to the Sonic series and in general for a lot of media. So today I want to sit down and talk a little bit about the benefits of potential, but also the downfalls of it and the problems it can cause and all the expectations. So I figured everybody sit down, relax, enjoy the content. Let's get right into this. And please, by the way, consider subscribing to your boy and supporting the content if you enjoy the video. Yippee! All right, today I was in the mood to talk about potential. Now, the reason this has come up is because I've noticed this Twitter trend a lot lately where people will show a picture of like a character and be like, meet potential man, right? Or potential franchise, right? Always if, but never is, you know, always almost there, but never gets fully there, you know, has one entry, never more, like stuff like that, where like it basically just implies that like something is always chasing a bigger picture, but never really hitting it. Now, I do think when it comes to Sonic as a franchise, it has a benefit and a bit of a downfall when it comes to being a potential series. Like, obviously, you know, Sonic is one of the most established and known series in gaming history, right? But it's also full of potential. And so I want to sit down and explore a little bit about what we can get into in terms of games and characters and the overall franchise. Let's start, I think, with the franchise itself, right? Because Sonic, like we said, most prolific, one of the most iconic video game franchises of all time, right? But still definitely dealing with, you know, some turmoil, right? I do think we're like one game away, right, from leaving that place we were in a while, where like Sonic, you know, had a lot of, you know, bad critics on it and whatever, you know, because like Frontiers reviewed pretty well, you know, Sonic Crossroads reviewed really well, Sonic Shadow Generations reviewed really well, the movies people are enjoying. So I do think like there is a positive mind share that is happening with the Sonic series that like was gone for a while, and I genuinely think like if that next main game hits, then I feel like we're in the clear, at least for a while, right? But for the longest time, you know, Sonic had an interesting problem where a lot of these games would almost be too ambitious for their own good and too incomplete in some ways, right? Like one of the earliest examples of potential when it came to the Sonic franchise was, I would say, you know, the dark era, right? Like your 06s and Shadow the Hedgehogs and everything, right? Because I think about a game like Shadow the Hedgehog, right? To me, that's a game that like, wow, when you think about it, it's actually kind of ahead of its time with the idea of like multiple endings, right? And, you know, branching level paths. Because like we see so many games try to do that nowadays. Now, granted, I'm not saying no game did it before Shadow, but it was a big thing back then, right? And the idea of exploring Shadow and giving, you know, a second Sonic character, right, the main spotlight, is a big deal, right? But obviously, they treated that game in a very weird way, right? Where, you know, they gave him guns. It wasn't really like the same thing as a regular Sonic game. Like they almost like fragmented it and put it on the side as its own thing, right? And so I feel like when it comes to Shadow the Hedgehog having its own game, it was put on the potential side for a while. In fact, Shadow himself, I feel like after 06, right, got put on the wayside of potential for the longest time, right? Because after 06, he's not playable in like any of the mainline games for a long time, right? You know, he's kind of in Sonic Boom, he's sidelined as like just the edgy guy, even in the spin-offs. But, you know, then boom, last year, or I guess 2 years ago now, god damn it, was the year of Shadow, right? Where it felt like, okay, now I feel like we're in a very satisfying place with Shadow the Hedgehog, right? Like we got him in a movie, we got him in Sonic X Shadow Generations, right? And now granted, those things are great, but also those things are kind of retreading old ground, right? You know, with Shadow, when it comes to that, like Shadow Generations was exploring Shadow's past because it's Generations, and obviously the movie is re-exploring the idea of Shadow. So even a character like Shadow, to an extent, still deals with the potential man argument where people want him to finally do more. Like, okay, what happens when Shadow is fully, you know, away from the Maria thought process, right? Or the stuff with Black Doom. Like, what does Shadow do next in his life, right? What is the potential that Shadow has to grow as a character? Or is he just kind of meant to be stagnant and he's just kind of live his life the way he always, you know, has and always is going to bring up Maria and the past in some ways? I do know people really do like Sonic 06 Shadow because of that. It is exploring his life post thinking about Maria. Like, you know, he's working for Gunn. He's going on his own missions. You know, you have the storyline with Mephiles. Like, there is some moments of that. But again, even a character like Shad that people love, he does face that potential man argument. Another place my mind goes to right away is Sonic and the Secret Rings and Black Knight, right? This is what they dubbed the Storybook series games for Sonic. They were on the Wii, and I think we all know the story of these games, right? These games, what's so cool about them is, like, on paper, right, these two games are incredible ideas, right? It's like, all right, how do we make Sonic a little bit more fantasy, medieval, right? And maybe explore different eras of history, right? You know, obviously there was rumors back then that they wanted to explore, you know, a pirate era or even Greek mythology. People always wanted them to explore for the Sonic Storybook series, right? But the idea of Sonic, you know, entering these different eras, you know, in Sonic and the Secret Rings, you have the more Arabian Nights era, and then Black Knight, you have like a bit of a more medieval King Arthur era type story. And these games are so cool. I feel like these, to me, are like pinnacle of potential, man. Where, like, all right, these games, you know, with Sonic, like, you have this like meter system in Sonic and the Secret Rings where you can slow down time, you can go faster, you can upgrade Sonic, right? It's super cool. But then you have to deal with the game, right? You have to deal with the game itself, you know, where you're holding the Wii controller back and forth. The levels in general are a little bit too on rails, you know, and so you don't really get the freedom to explore the concept and ideas of that world. Yeah, there's a fan project that's working on a Secret Rings, you know, remaster on PC where, like, you can play with regular controls and stuff. And even when you play with that, like, the game is better, right? But it does still feel like you are limited to the on rails areas. Whereas, like, if the game lets you go all in, right, including in Sonic and the Black Knight, right, where maybe the levels were a little bit more open, you had more control of the character, you could go around, you know, an open area, actually slashing through enemies, or, you know, playing a little bit more of regular Sonic type stuff, I feel like you'd be able to hit that potential a lot more. But again, these to me are such a great definition of what is a potential side stage, because to me, this is like an endless ocean of exploration, right? Of course, again, like I said, you can go to Greek mythology, you can go to a more pirate area, you can go to, you know, you can go to an Egyptian era, right? There's so many things you could do with the Storybook series, and I'm almost upset that they call it the Storybook series, because if anything, that almost labels more potential than it is. You know, why did you start labeling it as the Storybook series when there's only 2 games in it, bro? Like, I even wonder when they were ever going to see it again, right? Like, that's one thing that I'm super curious about. Is like, are we ever gonna see that again, or is that just like a one of the, because these games were the ones that also started experimenting with Sonic getting different forms, right? That weren't just with the Chaos Emeralds. I mean, you get Darkspine Sonic in Secret Rings, and then you get Excalibur Sonic in Black Knight, and these forms are awesome. You know what I mean? Like, these are such good ideas for forms, but you know, you never get to do much with them. Speaking of potential man forms, we obviously have Dark Sonic from Sonic X, right? This one is brought up a lot when it comes to Sonic, right? Exploring the idea of, you know, pushing Sonic to the limit, hurting his friends, this sort of dark side to Sonic, you know, that could be unleashed if you hurt someone that he truly cared about, right? Would they ever explore that again? That was something that showed up in, you know, literally, it's crazy. That was a 1-minute form that showed up in Sonic X, but it to this day has left such an impact on people, right? Like, people still think about that, you know, brief moment where he turns dark like that and he goes a little bit crazy, like, and, you know, it's one of those things where, do you even want to explore this idea of Sonic, you know, potentially being so mad about losing a friend that he goes kind of crazy into this form? Or is Sonic always meant to keep his head high, be confident, you know, make sure he saves the day, right? That gets into a weird debate almost about what they want to do with that. But again, that was also, though, at the time, that was a potential man moment, right? Because it's a moment where you're like, oh shit, you're introducing that Sonic can turn to this form, and then we never see it again, right? Which obviously, you know, the show is different from the game, not the same writers, not the same, you know, canon and everything, right? But it would have been nice at that time during the anime to explore more of that. I mean, speaking of, anime and movies, right? I think like when it comes to Sonic, that's also a big point people bring in, right? Like the potential for an anime, right? The potential for an animated movie, right? I think Sonic is such a good franchise to make content for in terms of animation, right? Like there's so much creative flexibility in terms of the characters, right? The way they're designed, how they look, how cartoony they are, that like, the same way they work for live action, they would work incredibly well for animation, right? But I do think, people always want, like, we have yet to have a modern Sonic series that like all the fans are universal, like, this is awesome. You know what I mean? Because like Sonic Boom, I think a lot of people, some people find funny, but there's a lot of people that are like me that are like, it's just a comedy show with Sonic characters kind of skinned over it. Obviously, you have Sonic Prime, which skews a little bit younger and doesn't really hit the mark the same way people do. And then, as far, you go back to Saturday morning Sonic from back in the day, Adventures of Sonic. And then I do feel though Sonic X, and we all agree, is the one that I feel like in terms of a Sonic show, people feel the most impact on for Sonic fans. So like, all right, this is like, obviously there's a lot of filler, bad animation, and jank, right? But this is what people want out of Sonic and Friends, You get Sonic's friends' personalities, right, shown in there. You get a lot of sick, cool moments. You get Super Sonic. You get me about to sneeze. And you really get, that extra layer, and people want to see more of that, right? But again, the nice thing about Sonic as a series is, it still works within the stuff they do. I mean, they still make the animated prologues for stuff like Sonic Racing Crossroads, or the animation they did for Knuckles for pre-Frontiers release. Like that Knuckles anime, the one that they dropped, the Knuckles, what is it called? Divergence, or the Knuckles prologue before Frontiers, like that to me is the ideal like Sonic animated series, right? It's just one that looks like that, has that tone, where you have a character like Knuckles chilling and then he's dealing with the threat. Like something like that would be like incredible to see. Or even obviously Shadow Dark Beginnings, which came out during the year of Shadow, which was like an incredible mini series about the character and Team Dark, what they're doing at the time, right? So that's something that I want to see a lot more of when it comes to Sonic. And again, it's something that falls into the potential conversation. Now, another nice aspect, though, that comes with potential, man, is that you get the incredible fan work, right? I think when it comes to being a potential series, a lot of times the fans will open up the potential for you, right? It leads to creative freedom from the community, right? Obviously, one of the biggest examples I could think about this in recent times is Silver, right? Silver is the poster boy for Sonic in terms of potential, man, right? Everybody loves Silver the Hedgehog. Like, they're like, he's super cool, he's super awesome, but like, what has Silver done since Sonic 06? And even then in 06, he's already set up, because he's in 06 and he has to deal with the problems of that game and everything, right? So Silver, for literally now this year, 20 years this year, has been a character that like, from his design is fantastic, right? And people like him, right? But, it's been people sort of writing him to be better than he is, right? So we think about, that trend that happened last year where people were all drawing, Silver in a poncho, right? Where they destroyed Future, where you explore what happened to his world later on, where Sonic is gone. Like that trend that went super viral. I mean, there's even a game called Project Silver that like fans are working on. They just had like a direct where they talked about it for like 20 minutes. That to me though is a bit of the magic that comes with a character or a series or whatever being a potential in a lot of ways, because then you get people being like, all right, well, if they're not gonna do it, then I am. You know what I mean? And what I love about the Sonic community and the Sonic fan base is that a lot of the fans will end up making stuff on their own. I mean, we have incredible artists, animators that have made incredible, sprite battles. You have characters making like full-on animated series on YouTube, like with Sonic. Like, it is unbelievable what the fans have been able to do with this series because they have a vision for it that can't always be met, right? And I think a big part of this is Sonic's friends. Now, we're here to meet potential cast, right? Always, always could, never always is. Sonic has a good and bad problem where Sonic has such a big cast of characters that when it comes to it being a video game franchise, it is very difficult to give all of them the love that everybody wants from them. You know, I feel like back in the early 2000s when video games were easier to make, it was easier for a game to have like 8 playable characters, right? Or like, you know, a team, you know, Sonic Heroes where you had like multiple teams with 3 characters, right? But that's like that would be a crazy ask. You know, could you imagine a modern video game where you got to play as 8 like different characters with all their different campaigns and abilities and stuff? Like that just would take forever to make. You know, games take so many years to make. And so I feel like that era where, you know, it felt like a lot of the Sonic casts got story moments, right? Or they were all playable in different ways, is difficult to achieve just because of how long game development is. Now, I do think, right, when it comes to the Sonic cast, there is a clever way Sega and Sonic Team could circumvent this, and this is by, you know, exploring different mediums. Like, for example, the Chaotix, right? Chaotix are a great example. These guys are like potential man heavies, right? Where they're like, all right, they're these broke, you know, people that work for their own detective agency that they've created, right? And recently we had the old Chaotix Case Files. It was like this podcast series or audio series where, you know, you got a full storylines with the Chaotix, but it was all audio, right? And that was fantastic to me. The story was really great. You know, the voice acting, the music, that was fantastic. And I think, right, when it comes to Sonic, you know, people want these characters playable in more games and more things, right? But I'm kind of content in some way to have them in some form, right? Because like I said, there is just too many Sonic characters to account for. You have the Chaotix, right? You have an IDW. People love, you know, Lanolin. You know, you've got Tangle Whisper, right? Tangle Whisper are the new potential girlies on the block. These two are on the rise to sort of be like Sonic mainstays. You could see Sonic Team trying to push them. They added them in Crossroads. They're like the face of IDW. They add them to the mobile games, the spin-offs, right? Like Sonic directly mentions Tangle in, you know, Sonic Frontiers. Like this is very much the characters that people, you know, that Sonic Team wants you to really know about, right? And so it's not fair to call them potential men characters because, you know, they're new and on the block, but they have so much potential to be incredibly popular. They have the design, they have the voice acting, you know, they've got the personality. Like they could be one of the mainstays of Sonic. But again, you get this weird balancing issue with Sonic, right? Where people are like, well, where do we go? Because you look at Sonic Frontiers, right? The Final Horizon. We got playable Amy, Tails, and Knuckles back after like so long, right? And then the question is, for Frontiers 2, what do we do? Right? Do we bring them back as playable side characters? Do you give them their own campaigns? Do you lump them together as like a team? Do you explore different characters? Like this is a almost good problem that Sonic Team has, right? Where they're like, all right, we have so many characters that people love, but it's literally impossible to shine all of them, right? And so I do think a smart way to circumvent that when it comes to, you know, potential of characters is giving them places in different games, right? Like I said, putting the Chaotix in the Case Files scenario was really great. Maybe put them as NPCs in the next game to do like a side quest of some sorts, right? You know, Surge is Sonic's rival, quote unquote, in IDW Comics. Have a boss fight with her in the next game. It doesn't have to be she gets an entire game, right? Or like you think of Metal Sonic. I mean, Metal Sonic, you want to talk about poster boy villain for potential, that is him, right? And obviously he's about to have a big year all to himself, you know, with him being the star of the show, right? But that's a guy, Metal Sonic, that is Mr. Potential Villain, a robot captured or created by Eggman to be Sonic's killer slash superior in many ways, that is dealt with as a robot this identity crisis of like genuinely thinking he is Sonic and that Sonic is the fraud and trying to be the strongest character, learning every move that he possibly can. Like Metal Sonic has the potential to be the most broken character in the universe. I mean, he straight up can learn chaos control. He can learn anything, right? But he's shackled, you know? And so what happens when you break those shackles a little bit more and you get, you know, Metal Overlord or Neo Metal from IDW? Like there's so much shit you can do with Metal Sonic. I've always had this idea where, you know, now that Surge is in the fold, right? That like Surge and Metal Sonic work together. Could you imagine like Surge's abilities, you know, sorry, did I say Surge? Sorry. Sage's abilities mixed with Metal Sonic's abilities together could be like unbelievable. And because they're siblings, right? That power can go hard, right? Or, you know, you could have the opposite where Metal Sonic rebels, full rebellion, leaves Eggman's clutches, shouldn't have to be his underdog anymore, and he just goes to do his own thing, which to me sounds way more exciting. I mean, like, and I'm just scratching the surface over here, right? Like, let's get into something like hype moments and aura, right? That's something that, when it comes to Sonic, he is so cool that, fans have made incredible animations and ideas that, could potentially come to light when it comes to Sonic, right? Like, people have always thrown the idea of like, all right, we've had these crazy moments in Sonic Frontiers, right? Where you have Super Sonic versus these giant titans, right? What do you do next? People want rival battles, right? Rival battles are something that I've been explored in a long time, right? So the idea of bringing back rival battles in some way for Sonic would go incredibly hard, right? So something like that, or potentially new forms. I mean, how many times have people brought up Hypersonic, right? People talk about Hypersonic all the time when it comes to potential, right? They're like, that's the form, where it's like, we have not seen that form since the original games. It's very clear that Sega just does not want to reintroduce Hyper. I feel like we're gonna see it one day. I think Sega and Sonic Team are lying, and I do think one day we will see the return of Hypersonic. I just think they're keeping it close to their chest in case they want to revisit it one day. But I just feel like Hypersonic is just too cool of a concept, and they know so many people always bring it up, that I would be shocked in a lot of ways if one day we don't see it come back, right? But again, that's always the discussion, right? It's always ifs and buts. And I mean, this is a video game franchise at the end of the day, right? And I've talked a lot about games that do exist that have had potential, right? But it's like, what about games that don't exist that people want to see, right? Like, we always talk about the potential for a Sonic fighting game, right? I've made plenty of videos talking about a potential Sonic fighting game because Sonic the Fighters from back then is just not enough, right? Sonic as a fighting game series has so much potential because I can picture it in many ways, right? I can picturing it being a 3D arena fighter, but I can also picture it being, an action series. You know what I mean? Like, I could also picture it being like a 3D game. Sonic could be an arena fighter, but he could also be an incredible 2D anime fighter, right? He could also be a, go back to the Sonic Fighter style and be like a Tekken-like fighting game. Like, that's a sub-series that could be incredible. I've always thought about the potential of a Sonic beat-em-up. Sega has a great history of beat-em-ups with Streets of Rage, and, people have always been begging for a Sonic beat-em-up, and I feel like that would be such a good way to have, new sprites of the Sonic cast, right? Have them playable in these open, areas you can explore around. You can have more of the cast playable in there. You could offer DLC. It's like, there's so much you can do. I mean, there's game ideas that we've all constantly had. I know after DK Bonanza came out, people said like, all right, Knuckles, bro. Knuckles got to be the one breaking through walls, grabbing shit, tossing it around as he's doing stuff. Like, that would be like an incredible idea for Knuckles. I've always thrown around the idea, I obviously want my Sonic and, Dragon Ball Club. That would be so awesome, dude. There's even game mechanics that enter the potential argument, right? I always think to Sonic Lost World, right? Introducing the parkour gimmick in Sonic, but also really implementing it in kind of like a wonky, weird way that never feels like you really want to explore it, nor are given the opportunities to really do it. But by no means should Sega abandon this, in my opinion. Like, Sonic should have an incredibly fluid movement, right? Where he can run up a wall, grab the ledge, run from one wall to another, spin dash from the wall upwards. Like, Sonic is one of the coolest, fastest, most acrobatic characters out there, right? And so the idea of going all the way through, a level, but being able to flow through it incredibly well with some parkour is fantastic, right? But again, it did fall into the potential area where, like, all right, they kind of opened the idea up in Lost World, but they don't really touch on it again. You know what I mean? Like, it just kind of like it stays there, but they don't do too much with it. Now, this is also something that we want to see more of, right? And obviously, when it comes to Sonic, there's infinite potential when it comes to gameplay gimmicks. I feel like the Wisps as ideas are really cool, but there's plenty of gimmicks you can explore there, right? Sonic has a moveset in Frontiers of different attacks he can do. You can expand on that and do more of that, but that's less potential, man. That's more like, stuff you could expand on, in my opinion, right? And I think, to me, this is just what shines about the series a lot, but it's also just a problem. I mean, you think of Amy, right? I have this poster of Amy back there, and Amy is like such a wild card character, where she also has the potential to be like an incredibly cool character, right? But I feel like the last few games, a lot of people agree that like she's written in a bit of an odd way. But she's a character that has a lot that can, you know, happen with her. Same with Tails, right? Same with Knuckles. Now again, post Frontiers, right? We had, you know, the characters did say they want to go do their own thing, explore their own, you know, ideas and flesh out their lives. I hope that they do that. You know, I hope that we do get that push with those other characters, you know, with Team Sonic to go do their own thing. Whether we play as them and, you know, we see them change, or, you know, the game starts us off and they've, you know, changed and evolved over time. There's a lot that they could do with the cast, right? But again, like, this is what I love about this series, is that it has so much potential. And like that to me is a sign of a really good franchise, where you can constantly think of cool ideas and things it can do, right? But you might never get everything you ever want because there's just a limitless amount of potential. You know, whether it's like you know, obviously in the comment section below, let me know what is your dream Sonic thing, right? Whether it's a character solo game, whether, you know, it's a gimmick you want to see, whether it's an idea you want to explore, a story you think they would never explore, potentially will. Like that to me always fascinates me, right? And gets me excited. Is that like, all right, what's next? I think of a game even like Sonic Crossworlds that we've been playing and loving. It's like, for me, that has potential to do even more. You know, take me to more different crossroads, bring in more crossover characters, you know, add some new content. And obviously that's a little bit different than potential. That's like more, I want more content, right? But it's like, dude, man, this, when it comes to Sonic, like I want so many things. Like I think of Eggman, right? Eggman now has the potential to really evolve as a character now that he has Sage by his side. You know, he has a daughter that he loves and cares about. Therefore, he has something that humanizes him more than, you know, ever before. And so there's a lot of potential with the character you could explore. Same way I said it with Metal, same way I said it with Amy. She has a lot to do. I mean, Blaze, right? You've got a whole soul dimension out there that we have not really explored, you know, besides, I guess, a little bit of Sonic Rush Adventure. But like there's so much you can do and explore and try to find out with these games. I mean, there's gameplay ideas like Sonic Rush, you know, 2D Sonic is the potential of Sonic, right? Is 2D Sonic supposed to be classic Sonic? Is it supposed to be a Rush style? Like what are they to do with 2D? But again, I think it's a limitless problem, but it's also a good thing. Because as much as I want a new Sonic Rush game, I would love a classic 2D Sonic game to just be fantastic. Like I just want one that is incredible, right? But I also want a new Rush game. I also want Adventure 3, right? I also want a new Storybook series game. I also want Silver to get the spotlight, right? I do think Sega is slowly but surely giving a lot of the cast some love. You know, you gave, you know, Team Sonic a lot of love. We're about to get Amy and Metal Sonic getting a lot of love. We got Shadow back in the spotlight. I feel like Silver is going to be next on the table. You had the Chaotix with, you know, the Chaotix case files. Like, I do think Sonic Team is starting to explore ways to expand the entire cast of Sonic in different ways. So while it can't always be via games, because games are a lot harder to make and they're more bigger and ambitious, I do think exploring potential smaller games, you know, projects that are on the side, animated series, all that stuff, movies potentially. There's so much they could do and so much they could explore overall at the end of it. So guys, let me know what you guys think about the Sonic series potential, man, conversation / argument. Do you think there's too much potential? Do you think, you know, can it ever be met? What y'all doing? Let me know what's popping. Of course, guys, I love you. Thank y'all for watching. Of course, I'll see you all next time. Peace out.